When a woman withdraws her warmth, her attention, her presence, most men react instinctively. They chase, they plead, they scramble to fix something they likely didn't break. And in doing so, they surrender their power. It is a form of panic masked as affection. They believe that love is proved in persistence, in showing her how much she means to them, in chasing her back into their arms. But this is a dangerous illusion, because when you chase, you reinforce her belief that you are the one who needed her more. You position yourself beneath her emotionally, and in that imbalance, respect dies quietly. It's not about playing games. It's about understanding that withdrawal is not always rejection. It's often a test. A woman doesn't always want a man who follows her into the shadows of her uncertainty. Sometimes she wants to feel the weight of your absence, to realize that your presence is not a constant, not a guarantee, not something she can toy with and retrieve at will. The modern man has been so conditioned to fear loss, to fear silence, that he forgets how powerful it is to simply step back and let someone feel the void they created. That void is not filled with bitterness or anger. It is filled with dignity. It is built on a foundation of self-respect. You don't disappear to hurt her. You disappear to preserve yourself. You do not run, you retract, quietly, with intention, with composure, and most importantly, with the knowledge that your energy is sacred, that your time is not a reward for uncertainty. When she withdraws affection, she must be met with stillness, not confrontation, not panic, stillness. There's an old truth that what you tolerate, you invite. If you chase every time she pulls away, you are training her, you are teaching her that withdrawal is a tool of control, that emotional distance grants her more power, more attention, more access. It's not just about attraction. This is about dynamics. And when dynamics shift into imbalance, everything else eventually crumbles with it. A relationship cannot be built on pursuit alone, especially not one-sided pursuits. But what happens when you don't chase? When you respond to her distance with your own silence, that space becomes loud, deafening even. She begins to question what she assumed. She expected the usual routine, the call, the message, the explanation. She expected a man who needed to be needed. But instead, she finds quiet. And in that quiet, she is forced to face herself, to ask why you haven't followed, to confront the reality that maybe, just maybe, you don't need her as much as she thought. This is not cruelty. It's clarity. It's the mature understanding that connection is a two-way exchange, and when one side retreats, the other is not obligated to compensate. You must be willing to let her feel discomfort. Let her wonder. Let her sit with the distance. Because if she can't tolerate the silence she created, then she will reach out. And if she can, then you now have your answer. There is something deeply masculine about the man who can sit in the silence without flinching, who can feel the tension, feel the uncertainty, and remain unmoved. That man radiates a kind of strength that no display of affection can replicate. He is the center of his world, not a satellite orbiting hers. And that grounded presence, that refusal to be baited by withdrawal, forces a woman to reckon with what she truly values, not just emotionally, but biologically. Because women don't want to lead the emotional narrative. They test because they want to find a man who won't be pulled into their storm, who remains calm, anchored, whole. The man who chases cannot be respected because his actions are driven by fear. Fear of loss, fear of being alone, fear of not being enough. But the man who pauses, who allows space to speak in his place, that man earns something greater than approval. He earns consideration. He earns attention that isn't demanded but drawn. Because now she's wondering if she went too far, if she misjudged your depth, if maybe this man she expected to chase is the very man she cannot afford to lose. We must reclaim the understanding that silence is not weakness. In fact, silence, when applied with discipline, is the loudest form of strength. It says, I do not move just because you expect me to. I do not panic just because you disappear. I am not shaken just because the rhythm changed. And that forces a recalibration. It introduces a new dynamic, one where she realizes you are not bound to her choices, but to your own principles. You don't chase her when she withdraws. You let her suffer in the space she created, because in that suffering there is realization. And in realization there is the only kind of return that's worth accepting, one born not of guilt but of respect. Men are taught, often from a young age, that being emotionally available is the mark of maturity, that to be vulnerable is to be strong, that to share everything, to pour yourself out completely into another person is the highest form of love. But this is a half-truth, and one that can quietly destroy a man, because emotional vulnerability without boundaries becomes emotional dependency. And dependency, once sensed, triggers a woman's deepest instinct, not to nurture, but to test, to pull away, to challenge your composure. The man who cannot regulate his emotional state independently is not a man. In her eyes, he becomes something to manage. And no woman, regardless of how caring or affectionate she may be, wants to feel like your emotional caretaker. She may say she does, she may believe it on the surface, but the biology runs deeper. It runs in silence, in reactions she can't explain, in distance she can't justify. When you start needing her for your emotional stability, she begins to pull back, not because she is cruel, but because your center shifted from within to without, from principle to person, and that is deeply unsettling. The high-value man knows this. He doesn't suppress emotion, but he doesn't outsource emotional regulation either. He processes internally with discipline. He feels, but he chooses how and when to express. He does not allow his mood to be dictated by her actions, and most importantly, he does not make her the solution to his pain. There is a dignity in that restraint, a strength in emotional sovereignty. It is not apathy, it is mastery. And this mastery has consequences, not just within himself, but in the way others perceive him. When a woman sees that her absence doesn't shake him, that her silence doesn't unravel him, that her emotional shifts don't control his behavior, something happens. Respect enters the room because she realizes she is not his emotional compass. He is. That realization often leads to reflection, and reflection leads to return. Not because he begged, but because he didn't. Now, many will say, but shouldn't we fight for love? Shouldn't we show her how much we care? And the answer is yes, but not at the expense of self-respect. Not in a way that empties you out and leaves you resenting yourself. You can love deeply without losing your center. You can care without collapsing. But it requires you to stop operating from fear, because fear is the true enemy here. Fear of losing her, fear of being alone, fear of not being enough. These fears drive men to over-explain, to overreach, to overcompensate, to fill the silence with words that don't help, to send long messages that are never read with the same emotion they were written, to plead for clarity from someone who has already made a decision. But clarity doesn't come from external answers. It comes from internal alignment. And when you are aligned, you no longer need her to soothe your emotional state. You are capable of doing that yourself. That is what makes you dangerous in the best way. Dangerous not because you are cold, but because you are untouchable in your peace, because your value is not up for negotiation, because your sense of self is not hanging on the edge of her validation. And when a man reaches that level, everything changes. The energy shifts. She feels it. She may not say it, but she senses it, that she is no longer the center of your emotional world. And that's when the chasing stops, because now the dynamic has flipped. She begins to wonder what changed. She begins to miss the certainty you once gave freely. But now that certainty must be earned, because you don't give it to anyone who shakes it. And that is the beginning of real power. Not power over her, but power over yourself. The kind of power that allows you to stay still while others flinch, to remain grounded while others test, to walk away not out of anger, but out of understanding that your peace cannot be bartered. When you are emotionally detached, you are not detached from feeling, you are detached from outcome. You no longer seek to control her decision, you allow space. You trust the process. And most importantly, you know that no one, not even the woman you love, is entitled to your presence if she treats it as a given. Your love is a gift, not a leash. And once you internalize that, you stop chasing, not because you gave up, but because you woke up. So hold the line, sit in the silence. Let her feel what your absence means. Because if she comes back, it will be to a man she respects, not a man who begged to be understood. There's a principle that many men fail to grasp, and it costs them dearly, not just in relationships, but in the way they carry themselves through life. It's this: your absence must be more impactful than your presence. Not in a spiteful, arrogant way, but in a deeply grounded, almost spiritual sense. You see, most men try to earn love through constant giving. More attention, more messages, more presence, more presence. But what they fail to understand is that constant availability breeds complacency. It turns the extraordinary into the expected. It erodes value by flooding the emotional market with surplus. Human psychology doesn't respond to excess with appreciation. It responds with boredom. What is always available becomes invisible. It's not because she's cruel. It's not because she's ungrateful. It's because this is how we're wired. We chase what we fear losing, not what we believe we can summon on demand. And if you are always there, always reachable, always validating, always filling the silence, you never give her the space to feel your absence. And if she never feels your absence, she never contemplates your worth. It's that simple. You have to let your presence speak, not through words or gestures, but through contrast. The contrast between who you are and what she feels when you're not there. If your absence doesn't echo in her world, then your presence wasn't built on strength. It was built on convenience. And convenience is replaceable. The high-value man knows this. He doesn't aim to be the most liked. He aims to be the most remembered. And the only way to be remembered is to make an impression deep enough that it lingers when you're gone. Now that requires something uncomfortable. It requires you to pull back, to not chase, to resist the urge to fill every void with communication. It means stepping away when you're being taken for granted, not with bitterness, but with dignity. And that absence you create, it becomes the mirror. She looks into it, and if she valued you, she begins to feel the weight of your silence. Not because you punished her, but because you respected yourself enough not to beg for space in her mind. This is where the power lies, in her realization, not your explanation. Men talk too much when they should be silent. They explain when they should observe. They seek validation when they should be standing still. You don't need to explain why you're backing off. You don't owe a thesis on why you refuse to chase. You simply let the void speak for itself, because a woman will reflect in silence in ways she never would during conversation. In silence, she is forced to face the truth. She misses what she thought she could always return to. Your job is not to make her miss you. That's manipulation. Your job is to live in such a way that your presence is so rich, so intentional, that its removal makes a mark. That kind of presence is not built on flattery or nice words. It's built on substance, depth, discipline. And when you remove it, the contrast is jarring. She expected you to react, to plead, to be available. Instead, she gets distance. She gets silence. And suddenly, your value spikes, not because you tried to prove anything, but because you didn't. And that contrast will do more than any apology or romantic gesture ever could. It repositions you in her mind, not as someone who needs her, but as someone she had the privilege of experiencing. That is how you must live, not seeking attachment, but allowing connection to flow toward you when it is authentic and reciprocal. Your world doesn't collapse in her absence. It refocuses, it sharpens, it expands. You become more you, not less, when she steps back. And when she realizes that, it becomes clear that losing you wasn't just losing a person. It was losing a presence that changed the atmosphere. So when she returns, and many do, it won't be because of guilt. It won't be because you manipulated her. It will be because the space you left behind reminded her of what was real. The silence became louder than words. The distance became the teacher. And in that, you preserved your power, your self-respect, and more importantly, your frame. Because this is not about dominance. It's about self-possession. And self-possession is magnetic in a way no chasing ever will be. Live with such intensity, such clarity, that your absence creates a discomfort too sharp to ignore. Then, and only then, will she truly understand the value of your presence. Men often mistake attention for affection. They mistake being watched for being wanted. But here's the brutal truth. The modern world rewards visibility, not value. So many men are chasing eyes instead of earning respect. They want to be noticed so badly, they forget to ask what they're being noticed for. They become performers instead of builders, obsessed with the woman's reaction instead of anchored in their own reality. And so, when a woman pulls away, when she stops responding, when she gives them silence, they panic. They perform harder, they double down on effort. But in doing so, they reveal their desperation, and desperation never attracts, it repels. You have to understand, when a woman distances herself, it's rarely random. It's a probe, a signal. She's not just pulling away for herself, she's watching you. She's watching your reaction more than your words. Because your reaction tells her everything she needs to know about your internal structure. Will you beg? Will you spiral? Will you break routine? Will you collapse into emotional chaos and start chasing after her validation like a starving man? That moment is a test of your core, whether you realize it or not. And if your world orbits her moods, if your peace evaporates when she goes cold, then what you've communicated without saying a word is that you are ruled by her whims, not your principles. And that's where attraction dies. Quietly, subtly, not in a loud breakup, but in the soft erosion of respect. See, the man who maintains frame isn't unmoved because he's emotionally dead. He's unmoved because his internal order isn't dictated by external approval. When she pulls away, he doesn't chase, he doesn't fold, he doesn't panic. He remains rooted, focused, not to manipulate her, but because his path doesn't bend for uncertainty. His discipline isn't performative, it's lived. It's how he moves whether someone is watching or not. That kind of consistency is what separates the common from the exceptional. And she feels it. Even in silence, she feels it. Because what she expected was weakness, a breakdown, a pattern she's seen before. But what she gets is a man who refuses to be baited. A man who doesn't seek closure because he's not open to chaos. A man whose self-worth is built on internal order, not emotional gambling. This man isn't cold, he's clear. He knows that the only real power is self-control. He knows that staying grounded while someone else spirals is not indifference, it's strength. And women, especially those used to wielding emotional power, notice that difference immediately. It unsettles them, not in a cruel way, but in a sobering one. Because suddenly they realize they're dealing with a man who doesn't just react, he decides. That decision-making power, that steadiness under emotional pressure, creates an energy that you can't fake. It can't be imitated because it's born from how you live when no one's watching. It's in how you train your mind, how you structure your days, how you control your impulses. Frame isn't something you pick up when the relationship gets rocky. It's the foundation that prevents it from collapsing in the first place. And let's be honest, women don't test you because they're malicious. They test because they're wired to seek stability. They need to know that the man standing next to them won't crumble when things get hard. They need to know you're not just strong in pleasure but composed in pressure, that you don't flinch at the first sign of withdrawal, that your reality doesn't start to fragment just because she's unsure of hers. Now here's where most men go wrong. They think maintaining frame means being stoic or emotionless, but it's not about that. It's about calibration. It's about responding from principle, not panic. It's about pausing instead of pleading, observing instead of overreacting, and letting her reveal who she really is when you refuse to play the emotional tug of war. Because in that space, in that pause, she feels something unfamiliar. She feels a man who does not flinch. And that's rare. In a world full of emotionally needy men, a man who is fully himself, with or without her, is not just attractive, he's unforgettable. So you maintain your frame not to prove a point to her, but to preserve your own alignment. You don't move just because she expects you to. You stay consistent, grounded, clear. You become the man who doesn't need to chase because he never lost direction in the first place. And when she realizes that, truly realizes that, it's not your words that bring her back. It's your stillness. It's your refusal to abandon your own center. It's the quiet strength of a man who would rather lose her than lose himself. There's something deeply misunderstood in modern relationships, especially by men who are constantly told that their role is to pursue, to fix, to prove. They're told that if she's pulling away, if she's acting distant, then they must close the gap immediately. They must rush to reassure, to accommodate, to earn back their place. But that mentality is rooted in fear. And fear is a poor foundation for anything meant to last. When a woman begins to detach, it triggers something primal in a man, a sense of loss, a sense of inadequacy. He assumes he's done something wrong and that correcting it means jumping into action. But what he doesn't realize is that this reaction only confirms her suspicions. It shows her he can be emotionally manipulated, that his sense of calm is fragile, that his validation depends on her approval. And when that's revealed, something shifts in her. Not always consciously, but instinctively, respect begins to erode because she senses, perhaps for the first time, that you need her more than you need your own direction. This is why detachment is critical. It's not about pretending you don't care. It's not about playing cold games. It's about preserving the sanctity of your inner world. It's about understanding that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is nothing. Not out of indifference, but out of strength. Because when you give space, real space, you allow reality to reveal itself. And that reality is often more telling than anything spoken. You see, detachment gives you perspective. It lets you see whether she truly values the connection or whether she was merely enjoying the attention. If she only responds when you pursue, if she only engages when you initiate, then what you have is not a relationship, you have a performance, and you are the actor. But when you step back, when you stop feeding energy into the dynamic, her true level of interest is exposed. She will either move toward you or she won't. And both outcomes are valuable. Because when you detach, you stop confusing effort with effectiveness. You stop believing that more input guarantees a better outcome. Relationships aren't like machines. They're like mirrors. They reflect your behavior, but they also reflect your worth back at you. And if you're constantly pushing to be seen, constantly chasing to be heard, then eventually you stop seeing yourself clearly. You become reactive instead of intentional. That's where so many men lose themselves. They pour more and more into someone who's giving them less and less, believing that the answer lies in doing more, sacrificing more, caring harder. But love doesn't bloom in desperation. It blooms in mutual respect, in admiration, in a kind of sacred space between two sovereign individuals who choose each other without pressure. And when one side starts carrying all the weight, the dynamic collapses under the imbalance. Detachment resets that dynamic. It says, I won't carry this for both of us. It says, if you want me, you'll have to meet me where I am. And it reintroduces something powerful into the equation, uncertainty. Now she must question whether you'll always be there waiting. Now she must face the silence and decide what to do with it. That discomfort is where clarity lives. But you must be willing to sit in that discomfort too. Because detachment is not without pain. It requires you to resist your impulses, to silence the urge to fix things immediately, to endure the unknown. It demands that you hold the line even when you feel everything inside you pulling toward her. But it is precisely in that stillness, when you choose principle over panic, that your value reveals itself, not just to her, but to yourself. Because the man who can detach when necessary is not weak, he is sovereign. He knows that no connection is worth the cost of his peace. He knows that love given under pressure is not love, it's survival. And he does not wish to survive in a relationship. He wishes to grow. He wishes to inspire. He wishes to lead, not chase. So you give her space, not because you want her to suffer, but because you refuse to suffer for someone who hasn't earned your suffering. You do it not to punish, but to preserve. You recognize that your emotional energy is sacred, and you won't invest it where there is no reciprocity. That isn't harsh. And if she returns, it will be different. It won't be because you begged. It won't be because you pushed. It will be because your absence reminded her of your presence. Because in the space you created, she discovered what was real and what wasn't. Sometimes the most powerful move isn't reaching out, it's stepping back and staying there until reality tells you what's worth walking toward again. There's a kind of pain most men never prepare for, not the pain of being alone or even the pain of being rejected, but the pain of being forgotten, of being overlooked by the very person they once gave their time, energy, and heart to. And when it happens, when the affection fades and the attention disappears, many men instinctively they try to reclaim what they once had by becoming smaller versions of themselves, more agreeable, more available, more desperate. But what they don't realize is this: once you are no longer respected, chasing her won't restore it. It only confirms that she was right to walk away. You don't get someone back by shrinking. You don't become valuable again by begging. Respect, once lost, cannot be pleaded into existence. It has to be earned, silently, indirectly, without needing to be asked for. And that begins the moment you decide to stop chasing and instead build the kind of man she never believed you'd become. The kind of man she remembers in silence, not because of what you said, but because of what you became after she left. Most men make the mistake of believing that the only way to repair a connection is to rush back in, to explain themselves, to appeal to emotion. But connection doesn't revive through noise. It revives through contrast. When a woman leaves or when she pulls away, there's always a part of her that wonders if she made the right decision. She might hide it well, mask it under indifference or defiance, but it's there. The question lingers, and your response either silences that question forever or brings it roaring back. If you beg, if you collapse, if you try to prove your worth through neediness, the question disappears. Not because it's answered, but because now she's certain. Certain that you need her more than you need your purpose. Certain that your emotional world depends on her. And no woman wants to be the sun in a man's sky if that sky has no direction of its own. She may enjoy the attention for a time, but she won't stay. She can't, because her biology isn't wired to admire dependency. It's wired to follow strength. But when you do the opposite, when you go silent, when you pull back, when you focus not on her but on yourself, that's when something shifts, not just in her but in you. You begin to reclaim the parts of yourself that were scattered in the chase. You stop living in reaction and you start living in design. You become harder to reach, not out of spite, but because you're finally building something real. And if she sees it, and she will, she won't return out of pity. She won't return to fix you. She'll return because she recognizes that the man who once stood still in confusion has become a man she can no longer predict or replace. There is no power like becoming the man she never thought you'd become. Not to win her back, but because you outgrew the version of yourself that allowed the dynamic to fall apart in the first place. You weren't wrong to feel, to care, to want the connection. But you were wrong to make her the prize instead of treating yourself as one. The moment you made her validation your goal, you surrendered your role as a leader. You became a follower in your own life, and no matter how good your intentions were, she felt it. So now you must do something most men never do. You must step away, not for effect, but for evolution. You must let her sit in the space you created, the silence you didn't fill, and let the reality sink in. That you didn't chase, that you didn't explain, that you didn't try to force something that was meant to flow, and that you walked away, not because you were angry, but because you were finally ready to walk toward yourself. You see, when a woman respects you, everything else becomes possible. But without that respect, love becomes unstable, desire becomes inconsistent, connection becomes conditional. Respect is the foundation, and it is built not through grand gestures, but through discipline, through the way you hold yourself when no one is watching, through the way you keep your standards, even when you're tempted to lower them just to feel close to someone again. It's not easy. Growth rarely is. There will be moments where you want to reach out, moments where you replay conversations, doubt your decision, imagine what you could have said differently. But you have to understand, growth doesn't come from comfort. It comes from standing still in the storm and refusing to be moved by emotion. It comes from remembering who you are before someone else tried to define it for you. And most of all, it comes from accepting that sometimes the best thing you can do for someone is let them feel your absence fully, without rescue, without interruption. Because only in that absence can truth emerge. Only in that silence can she realize what she lost. Not a man who needed her, but a man who was already complete. A man whose attention was a privilege, not a guarantee. A man who never begged, never chased, and never surrendered his dignity for fleeting connection. That is the man who commands attention without asking for it. That is the man who leads without saying a word. And if she returns, and not all do, it won't be to the same man she left. It will be to someone sharper, deeper, quieter. Someone who doesn't need her, but who could choose her. And that difference changes everything. Because now, the roles are reversed. Now it is she who must earn her way back into your life. Not because you're punishing her, but because you've finally realized the value of your presence. And that is the moment where your silence becomes louder than anything you could have ever said.